we looked at letters, I don't know which of the last 2 days, we looked at letters going back to, I think it was 65, and there was evidence that going back to the 50s, I think you testified, going back to the 50s, some 50 years, there were efforts to get her to do a will. Do you recall that?
Yes.
So after all those 50 years, finally it's going to occur on March 7th, 2005, correct?
Yes.
So the only thing that had happened to cause that was her determination to give $5 million to Hadassah Perry?
That's what she...
Objection.
Pardon me?
That's what she expressed to me.
Let's talk about the 7th then. You went to the hospital?
Yes.
How did you get there?
By taxi with Mr. Bach and Mr. Siegel.
And you arrived, and then what occurred? The three of you went to the hospital room?
Yes.
Who was there?
Hadassah was there.
Mrs. Clark was, of course,
Yes,
there.
of
Was she in bed, in her bed? You recall?
When he arrived?
Yeah. If you recall.
Best of my recollection, she was sitting in a chair.
Okay. And what occurred? Well, withdraw that. From the time you arrived until the time you departed, how much time transpired?
Best of my recollection, 45 minutes to an hour,
And all three of you left together?
to the best of my recollection.
So, when you walked in, what occurred first?
I don't remember the exact sequence.
Well, what do you remember?
Mr. Bach introduced Mr. Siegel to Mrs. Clark, told her that he would be supervising the signing of the will, that it was Mr. Bach's understanding that she had agreed to sign the will in the same form that he had submitted to her. He asked her if she had read it and understood it.
Mr. Bach asked that?
Mr. Siegel.
Oh, Mr. Siegel, I'm sorry.
Right.
Okay.
I don't remember the sequence, but
Fair enough.
Mr. Siegel asked Mrs. Clark if she had read it and understood it.
Can we clarify what rule this is?
Yeah, March 7th.
Okay.
Please don't interrupt. Please don't interrupt. He's telling the story. What occurred next?
I don't recall whether Mrs. Clark asked or Mr. Siegel asked if she would like to review the document.
Okay.
But it was determined that she asked me if I would read it to her.
So you read the whole thing to her?
Yes. And during the reading, there were one or two questions, and it was explained to her what the different paragraphs and language meant.
So, for example, you got to that paragraph that talked about the $5 million to Hadassah. You read that to her?
Yes,
Did she ask any questions about that?
yes.
What did she ask?
She wanted to make sure, if that was the language, that if something happened to her, that Hadassah would get the $5 million, whether or not Connecticut was sold or at that time. And it was explained to her that if she died, but if she became incapacitated, that would not be the case under this document. And was then asked if she understood that, and if that's what she intended, and she said yes.
Who asked her if she understood that?
Mr. Siegel.
Then what occurred? Oh, withdraw that. Likewise, you're in the process of reading it. Did you read the next paragraph that prescribed that how everything else would go to her intestate beneficiaries.
Yes,
And you read that, did she ask any questions about that?
yes.
What did she ask?
She said, but I don't intend for my family to get anything. And it was explained to her, both, I believe Mr. Bach and I explained this to her, that we had reviewed this with her, and if she wasn't prepared to make her final determination of distributees, or any determination of distributees at this point, that's the language that would be used. And if she passed away in the interim, then the family would it would go to her intestate distributees. And she says, but if I immediately sign a new will, what happens? I said, then the terms of that will apply. This will gets revoked by the terms of the new will. And she said, that's what I'm going to be doing very shortly.
And in response to that, did you say to her, we'll make sure that that new will is prepared very quickly for you?
As soon as you do it, I said, or you can wait until you have that before signing a will. And she said, but then her concern about Hadassah is that if she should die in the interim, would Hadassah get the $5 million? And I said, no, she would not.
Not until the property
Is sold.
was sold.